John Lamb Lash is a comparative mythologist and shaman. He has devoted his life to bring the Gnostic teachings back to humanity after millennia of extermination and suppression. What was it about the knowledge of these intellectual shamans of the ancient world that it had to be completely destroyed?
It is so dangerous to the powers that be. It is so dangerous to the globalist overlords, to the technocrats, as we call them today. But if the story of the Aeons of Fire had been known, about our true origins, about the nature of evil, about the Archons, none of that would have ever happened.
In this series of interviews, we will learn about the sacred mystery teachings of the ancient Gnostics and how it happened that we as a species have been torn out of our primal connection, our bond with Gaia, the living planet. We will also talk about the archontic, alien influence on the human mind that the Gnostics warned about, and how these ancient Gnostic warnings relate to the events of today and the agenda of transhumanism and technocracy. Well, where were we? I asked you about the components which are sort of designed to separate us from nature within the Judeo-Christian religions. And you started by answering it sort of from the very foundation that something alien is present, otherwise we wouldn't have this. So maybe we can take it from that question again.
Good place to go. Yeah. Talking about the Archons on the internet. So it's a dodgy proposition. Yeah. Basically, it goes to the problem of evil. And what I was attempting to say is that something that I believe deeply and I know to be true. Those who are struggling today with the problem of evil are getting a dose of it in their face from the covert deception. And they struggle with it naturally, normally, because they ask the question, well, how can anyone be so evil? How can anyone be so deceptive? And trying to understand in human terms where this nefarious influence comes from that is driving technocracy, driving the World Economic Forum, driving the transhumanist agenda. And my answer is the same answer that the Gnostics gave thousands of years ago. You cannot know the evil operating in the world today unless you include a paranormal factor. It is not human. It is an inhuman evil working through human beings. And those who are implementing this evil are really no longer human. They are the proxies and the enablers of an exobiological alien mindset. You see? Now, this is difficult for a lot of people to accept. It's, in my view, perhaps the biggest stumbling block to benefit from what the Gnostics told us, how they warned us. So as I was saying, just to reprise what I said before briefly, if you take all the different races on the earth and the different continents and cultures and you just leave them on their own, they're bound to have conflicts. They're bound to be wars or clan wars. And there are bound to be differences. They will also cooperate with each other. They will blend, they will merge, because the impulse of mutual aid is enormous in our species. It's inherent. But the differences and conflicts between the human races, if they are left alone, are solvable. But when the third factor comes in, when there's a third party intrusion, it's no longer possible to solve these, because it's as if you and I had an argument and a third party came in and meddled with our argument so that we could never sort it out on our own terms. This is the problem that we're facing with technocracy and transhumanism. It actually is not a human, it is not of human origin. There is a parasitical mind virus, which the Gnostics warned us about, and I have gone in great depth into explaining how this virus came to the earth. And it is due to this archontic virus that we have this insane and inhumane presence in our world. And until it's recognized as something that is not human, that it is an alien factor, we won't be able to solve the problem of evil. So I would quote a line that I love from one of the Gnostic texts that says, a great warning here, whoever does not know the root of evil is no stranger to it. That means is that if you, in your mind, are not clear on what the actual root of evil is, and it involves a paranormal factor, a paranormal interference, then you're never going to sort it out. You're never going to sort out the problem of evil, because human beings on their own are not capable of perpetrating the kind of evil that we see today in the Soviet deception.
So I have several questions about the Archons. I just wanted to, before we enter into that dark territory, I wanted to ask you about these anti-life components, because there is something when with the advent of the Judeo-Christian religions, I mean, instead of being sacred, now the earth is sinful. I mean, there is something within this whole program that is sort of anti-life that I think most people don't realize. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The operative term is biophobic.
Okay.
So those transhumanists, like Klaus, he's just a front man, of course, or people like Elon Musk, who are saying we're going to make a human IT hybrid, are actually biophobic. They themselves are infected with an attitude that is really afraid of life and hates with what lives. Now, this is a hard pill to accept, because if you don't include the paranormal factor of the Archons, you think, well, here's an ordinary human being. It's in the nature of a human being to love nature. We are a part of nature. Nature sustains us. How could we possibly hate nature? But there are people living today who are the proxies and agents of the Archons. They hate nature. They hate everything that is natural, including the natural instincts of the human animal. And so this biophobia can be traced back to its root. And that's what I do in Not in His Image in the first 5 chapters, 6. And I refer to what is called the cult of the Tzaddikim. And the Tzaddikim was a sect which survives today that grew within the genre of Judaic religion, comes out of Judaism. And that sect established in the world an ideology of a biophobic drive. And it is actually not human. It is something non-human working through the human being, human animal. And you see this biophobic drive, for instance, in the Old Testament. In the book of Deuteronomy, I believe, you find that Jehovah, the supreme deity of that religion, dictates certain rules to the people. And among those rules, there are something like 600 or more rules of hygiene, sexual behavior, alimentary rules, what you can eat, what you cannot eat, what you can handle, how you can handle food. And you think, well, wait a minute, what is this all about? Other indigenous peoples will have tribal taboos. For instance, they might have a taboo against eating the salmon. This is a very common theme. In the Aborigines, you find it. But they don't have a list of over 600 taboos about how you relate to the natural elements of life. But they do in Judaism. And that is the clear evidence that of this biophobic, life-hating impulse. And that is the essence of what the Archons are. They are biophobic.
I read an article that some new studies show that like 90% of all the mainstream pornography that male people watch are actually violence and humiliation of women masquerading as sex, a virus of the mind which sort of completely corrupts sexuality. But somebody would probably argue that, well, it's human beings who created pornography. It's nothing Archon. How can they create? Could you explain that?
Well, porn is a great subject, and I don't talk about it often, but I appreciate you bringing it up. I would say this about porn, and believe me, I do not promote or endorse porn. Believe me, I don't. But there's a massive amount of porn on the internet. And if you made a pie chart, and if you just took one sliver, one thread of that pie chart, it would be the pornographic films that simply show people having sex. And there are such films. Not cruelly, not brutally, not in a perverted way, but just performing the normal activities of sex, right? So why is there only one thread of pornography that shows that, a film of people having ordinary sex? And why is all of the rest of the pie chart filled with pollution, perversity, sadomasochism, child pornography? Why? It again goes to the biophobic element. The people in the porn industry, we know who you are, have the intention to take, again, that natural sexual instinct of bonding and beauty and pervert it and distort it and corrupt it because they hate it. They are evil in their hatred of it. And so everything that they see that is natural and beautiful in the human animal, such as the sexual act actually is, you see, in its basic innocence, they hate that. And so they surround it and deluge it and immerse it in perversity and sadism, because that is their mindset. Porn, by the way, is not the right word. If you had a healthy, I shouldn't go off on porn, but I can't resist saying this. What if you had a healthy form of porn? What would that be? Well, it'd just be sex education. And I can tell you, I wish I had that when I was a teenager. I wish I had someone show me what to do in the sexual act, how to perform it in the natural and respectful and sane way. So it should be called sexography. Sexography would be the education in how to perform acts of sex. Yeah. It would be, in a way, the sexual initiation of our children. And that would be an enormous counterforce to the sexual perversion of our children, which we are seeing today.
Yeah. Several chapters of your book, you discuss Christianity and what you call the deceit of Christ. And there's a very powerful quote that I would like to read, where you say, "It is not Jesus Christ who is crucified on the cross. It is human imagination, the inborn visionary power of our species."
Indeed. That's one of my favorite lines in my book, by the way. And I just want to inform those listening who read the book that I'd like you to know that book was written in a state of cold, white anger. And many of the things that I say in that book most clearly are infused with an anger. But this anger is a good anger. It's like a blade, that cold blade that cuts through the problem of Judeo-Christianity. I really struggle to describe this problem of what I call the deceit of Christ, which you mention here. So let's say that, to summarize, what was the program? What was the challenge of those archontic actors who decided that they were going to do this, that they were going to tear humanity away from its innate connection to nature and love and reverence and dependence and direct it toward their program. Well, in the first place, they had to break that connection, which took murder over centuries. Murder, genocide, destruction of the literature of the mysteries, which was vast. But then that wasn't good enough. They had to go for the midwives and the witches and warlocks who carried the nature wisdom. You know, they had to go for that. That's a whole big story. But they had to do something else as well, which was to actually make it impossible for the human animal, the human species, to see itself, to know itself. The only way we can really know ourselves is in relation to our source, the wisdom goddess and nature. And so part of the human experiment, which is watched closely by the Aeons, the benevolent gods, is, well, how does the human animal reach a conception of itself? Now, when you look at any other species, like a dog or a cat or a horse, they're another species. And the one thing, among others, that makes them different from us is they don't have a concept of being a dog. The dog does not have a concept of being a dog. It doesn't need one. But because we are endowed with imagination and the capacity for self-consciousness, we need a concept of ourselves. I call it the species self-identity. And we would develop that naturally over time if our relationship to nature was not disrupted. But once our relationship to nature, which is the mirror of who we are, is shattered, then we are vulnerable to someone to come along and say, here, this is the image we give you of your humanity. And that is the deceit of Christ. It's a false image of who we actually are. And it has caused tremendous destruction. And I've talked a lot and attempted to expose that deceit extensively, especially in the revised version, which you have in your hands now.
And this quote, that it also is crucifying our inborn visionary power. Can you explain that too?
Yeah. It's like, what do you see when you look at your own humanity? And I look within myself. Know thyself. Well, I must know myself as I am created, as I am emanated, to use the Gnostic term. I must know myself as a member of the human species. How do I form that concept? Well, I need imagination. I need to imagine what it means to be human. This is so essential to our species to keep us on the right path. A dog, a cat doesn't need to imagine what it means to be of the canine species or of the feline species, but we do. That's one of the aspects of this experiment where the benevolent Aeons, they rely on us to achieve that. And we achieve it through imagination, but at the same time that the archonic plan rips us out of our connection with nature, it also has to demolish the imagination, because with the tool of imagination, we can reach that true concept of humanity. You see? So that's why they give us the AI version of humanity. They want to give us that. They want to make us into robots. They want ourselves to see us as zombie robots, because that's their plan. And actually, they use this figure of Christ to do that, you see? Because when I ask you this simple question, if you wanted to picture your own humanity, why would you picture it as a suffering man crucified to death on a cross? That's not your choice. You've not given the choice to do that. It's been fed to you. So many people today, and this is a tragedy of our time, which I would really like to do my part in correcting. You cannot look for that figure. I mean, look at that figure closely. What is it? It's two things at once. It's the Christ child, which represents the purity and innocence of every human person. But at the same time, it's the sacrificed child. Well, why do you want to sacrifice the child? What religion is that coming from? And of course, it's coming out of Judaism, because one of the leading stories of Judaism is about the sacrifice of Abraham of his son. You see? And I've said, and not in his image, in no uncertain terms, that child sacrifice is the foundation of Judeo-Christianity.
You also use a metaphor. I don't know if you use it in your book. In one of your talks, you say if you use a GPS all the time, after a while you forget how to navigate yourself. And there's something very deceptive with this sort of book of rules, and you need these commandments and stuff in order to be a decent human being.
Completely. They want to turn human beings into remote controlled zombies. And that is what a handheld device is. Granted, we use these handheld devices because they're here and we can use them for certain practical purposes, okay? I always let my friends know by text about I got on the plane or whatever. Fine. I used to fly, and millions of people used to fly without doing that, and they got there just fine. But they want us to believe that we cannot live without dependence on these handheld devices and on the totality of IT, AI, IT. And if we do so, if we fall into that trap, we won't be able to find our way across the fucking room anymore. I mean, look at what Zuckerberg is proposing. Meta.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you don't have to go visit your friends in Costa Rica or down the street. Right. You can put on a virtual reality mask and you can visit them virtually. This is what they want. They want us to live in the virtual. And if we live in the virtual, if we choose to stay in that trap, then we will be nothing but remote controlled zombies. And this is the end game of the Archons. And no one in any teaching of antiquity ever warned us about this as clearly as the Gnostics did.
So let's take it from the beginning. In this fantastic myth, the fallen goddess scenario, it is told how she plunges out of the pleroma where the aeons live into this other sphere. And as she plunges, she gives rise to this very weird inorganic species. Can you explain?
An incredible story. And I'll summarize it briefly and then remind me that I can give you the proof of what I'm saying, okay? So what happened was that when this plume, it's a plasma plume, that's what they call it. When it came out of the galactic core, it went laterally across the galactic limbs, which are these 4 spiral arms. Now, the matter of the galactic limbs is very different than the matter in the core. So it consists of dust and debris, elemental matter, which is of all previous galaxies. Every time any world collapses, it leaves all this debris, and then it swirls, and then it gets built into another world, okay? Beautiful picture. But I've compared it to taking a fire hose, or more accurately, a projector or device that sends out a blast of foam. Imagine if you had that kind of device and you were on a beach and you stood at the shoreline between the water and the sand and you released that outburst of foam right onto the beach. Imagine what a mess it would create. Mm-hmm. You see, the pure power of an aeon is normally confined to the galactic center. When it goes out from the galactic center, and this is an anomaly, it creates an impact in that outer zone, which is called the kenoma, or the world of deficiency. And her plunge from the galactic core terminated in the 3rd galactic arm. I've located all of this astronomically, and it created a crash pattern. Like if you dropped a massive ball on a lake of ice, it created a fracture pattern. And that's called, in the fallen goddess scenario, the impact zone. Well, the result of that was something that she could not predict and that she could not control. The result of that was that in that impact zone, a species actually appeared. That is the Archons. So the story is, my friends, who's responsible for the Archons? The Divine Mother herself, Sophia, produced the Archons by the unexpected effect of her plunge, you see? And the proof. When I wrote this in the beginning, and in 2001, I began to put the fallen goddess scenario out on the internet, I was dealing with that episode, the impact zone. They call it in the Gnostic texts of Nag Hammadi, the generation of the Archons. And I described it as clearly as I could. I was very faithful to the source materials. And I thought to myself, what the hell? No one is ever going to believe anything like this could happen. How could a species, which is an insectoid species, which is what the Archons are, they're like locusts. How could it just come out of nowhere? You know? Well, I think it was about 4 years after I wrote that chapter of the myth that I came across on the internet the document of what is called the abiogenesis of the Akari insects. And you can actually find that in a search machine. So it so happened that in the 1800s, an amateur British scientist performed an experiment. And this is in the record. It is in the records of the Royal Society of Science in England. And what he did was he got a plate, like a flat metallic plate, and he subjected it to a certain magnetic field. And as an electromagnetic field, and there were tensions in the electromagnetic field like this, playing on the plate. And what happened, I kid you not, and I am not making this up, was that mites, tiny microscopic insects, appeared spontaneously in that field. And so there is scientific proof that the impact of an electromagnetic force can produce a spontaneous generation of mites. The Archons are like mites, they're like lice, they're like, as I say, insects. They're cyborg insects. And so that experiment actually explains what the Gnostics described and what they saw, because they had clairvoyant vision and they had powers to investigate the paranormal.
And why do you call that? She plunged from the pleroma, you call it the world of limitation. Why do you say that? Because
there are the physics of Gnostic cosmology, by the way, are absolutely brilliant. The astronomy and the physics are brilliant. And one thing I love about it is it's so simple. It doesn't go into quantum mechanics, string theory. It doesn't go into all this speculation. So fundamental to Gnostic cosmology is the idea of a duality. There is the realm of infinite possibility, infinite potential. That is the core of the galaxy. That is the boundary zone of the aeons, the gods and goddesses. The zone of infinite potential. But then there is a zone of finite potential. And that is the area of the galactic arms, you see. Because why is it finite? Because it's composed of the residue of material universes that collapse and that continually reform and collapse. It's like grains being ground by a mill. It's a mill. It looks like a mill, right? So you have infinite potential and finite potential. That's fundamental. You don't have to speculate about anything else. So the realm of infinite potential is the pleroma, And the realm of finite potential is the kenoma. And that is the realm of the galactic arms. It's brilliantly simple. And a lot of very clear conclusions can be drawn from that syntax so that you don't get going like this and wondering about what's happening at CERN with the, particle collider, which is a bunch of nonsense that never produced anything, and is not based on the science of the natural world. It's based on mathematical physics. And mathematical physics is not physics.
So the Archons are, I think it's a word that kind of means rulers, right? And it says in the Gnostic text that they cannot create anything original, but they're masters to do copies and simulation. So it says that, I think you quote the Gnostic original text, the preference for simulation over reality is the primary innate risk of deviation for the human species. And one of the most important messages from the Gnostics is that the struggle against the Archons begin within our own minds. And I think that's the most difficult thing for people to wrap their mind around, that how can these alien entities influence our minds?
They influence our minds actually due to a gift we have. But like any gift, it can be misused. And due to the fact that their influence, their intrusion is real, it's a real paranormal intrusion. It's no joke. It's no fantasy. They have been broadcasting into the human mind for hundreds of thousands of years to try to break in and destroy this habitat. You see? But they don't have any intention, really. They're like blind locusts who just go and destroy a field of corn. You see? It's not an intention. It's something that they do because they don't know what else to do. So they rely on simulation. And that word occurs exactly in the Coptic language, Hal, H-A-L, which interestingly is the name of the computer in 2001. Right. Yeah. So what is Hal? It's virtual reality. It's Zuckerberg's Meta. And what they want to do is put us in virtual reality so that we don't know what our real reality is anymore. We don't feel, touch, taste anything real anymore. We are captured entirely in the simulation of the Archons. This is the battle. This is a big part of the battle we're facing now.
But is it also true that they can, I mean, as I understand it, you use also sometimes the phrase of Carlos Castaneda, they give us their mind, that actually some thoughts that we think are our own did not originate in our own mind. And I think that's for many people, they have this materialist worldview that this is inside my head, I control everything in here. Explain how that sort of, can you take an example perhaps? Or
Sure. Just think of an advertising, what they used to call a jingle, an advertising phrase, some stupid meme that they're advertising detergent or chewing gum or a new car, So you hear this, you pick it up on the radio, you pick it up on the internet. And what happens is it goes into your mind, doesn't it? And suddenly you're replaying this meme in your mind, but it didn't originate in your mind. You see? Not everything that happens in the human mind originates there. The test of the Archons now is for human beings to develop the discernment to know what operates in their own minds and what doesn't, what has been planted there. And that includes an enormous amount of malware. There's an enormous amount of malware running in the human mind. Religious malware, the malware of the technocrats. And so, Castaneda, I believe, whom I put myself in that lineage, said that the Archons, that the flyers that he called them, produce a foreign installation. There is a foreign installation in your mind, and it wants you to think that simulated reality is as good or better than real reality. You see? The icon of Christ, the figure of the suffering Savior as the ultimate image of humanity, is a malware. It's a foreign installation in your mind. And in the practice of Gnosis today, you delete those files and get back to the natural senses and the correct use of the imagination. One of the advantages that the Archons have on us, and it's important to mention this, is that in our endowment from our divine parents, Sophia and Thelete, we have 7 faculties. I've discussed in length what these faculties are. And one of these faculties is imagination, and also the ability to pretend. Now, pretending is totally innate to the human animal. Children pretend. They play and they pretend. Indigenous people, when they put on the antlers of a stag or they do rituals and they drum, they pretend to be animals. They pretend in a ritual way, which is a natural and good form of pretending. But the problem is that the archonic installation comes in and it takes advantage of that gift of pretending and it deviates it toward simulation. And then we're lost. That is one of the great advantages that we have. So we need to understand how our own faculties work in order to know how they are meddling with our faculties.
But one thing, the Gnostics claim that the Abrahamic religions was really a archontic mind virus that was implanted in the human mind. So first of all, if the Archons cannot create anything original, how could they create this belief system? And secondly, how could they introduce it into the human mind?
Right. Big questions. The statement that the Archons cannot originate anything is really important. And I advise people, even if you don't understand or grasp that statement, hang on to it, because it will get you to the truth. One of the ways it will get you to the truth, I can tell before I go to the second part of the question, is that it will make it perfectly clear in your mind that AI, which actually should be called archonic intelligence, right, can never match or excel human intelligence. Never, in any way whatsoever. In fact, AI is a product of human intelligence. The AI that human beings have created that is running this equipment is a product of human genius. But the AI of the Archons is a false mentality that piggybacks on that and wants to substitute itself for our own intellectual activity. I mean, this is a difficult proposition, but if you can get that, you're on to the game, okay? So they cannot originate anything. How could they originate a virus? Second part of the question. And this is really, I don't know what to say. This is some of the premium Gnostic intel that you will ever hear. They actually executed a neural hack. So the way that they got their intelligence, their foreign installation into the human species was by a neural hack, not a genetic hack. They have not hacked the human genome. And I stand very strongly against the claims of that people frequently make that they have hacked into our genome and meddled with our genomic formula. No, but they have hacked into the neuronal structure of the human brain.
And so the Archons have sort of like a hive mind. And if I understand it correctly, the Father God the Jehovah of the Old Testament was actually this hive mind of the Archons that got human beings to believe that he was the creator of the universe.
Absolutely. You know, when the Gnostics came out around 150 AD out of their sanctuaries and debated openly with the Christian and Jewish ideologues, that was a big exception they took, because they were not political and they did not go out in public and debate things. They educated people. And that cost them their lives to do that. And they came out with guns blazing, 6 guns blazing. One of the first things they said, well, hey, you know, Jehovah, Yahweh, the off-planet Father God that you place as the center of your religion, we'll tell you who it is. It's a demented alien who believes he is God, like the technocrats of the World Economic Forum. They believe they are the gods on this earth. And they said, your God is a demented pretender. And for that, they were not treated kindly. They exposed it at the core. And that exposure continues today. It's becoming more and more obvious where this transhumanist, Zetic impulse is taking us, you know, into oblivion, into zombie land. That's their wet dream.
And you said, I think there was an interview with Joanna Smith, that you said it's a cyborg intelligence that wants to steal our reality. So is it fair to say that it's not the same as artificial intelligence, but it's something very similar to what we have today?
The word artificial intelligence is deceptive and misleading. There is no such thing. All genuine intelligence is alive. The intelligence of nature, of a leaf growing, of a slug under the earth, of the microbes in a hand of dirt, the intelligence of a cloud, of an elephant, of a 3-year-old child is all alive. True intelligence is alive. And the archonic cyborg intelligence that the transhumanists are pushing on us is not alive, and it can never be alive. It can never be alive due to many factors, but principally because it lacks 2 properties. First, it lacks the property of intention, and the Gnostics warned us. The Archons really have no intention. They are a blind parasitical force. So no matter what Elon Musk or anyone says, they're lying to your face. There cannot be an android robot who has an intention of its own. There cannot be a program that gives intention to a robot or a cyborg. Never. It can never happen. And the second factor, attribute or property, which an AI, robot, android can never have, is what's called appetency, which is a fancy word for appetite. So you might recall, for instance, the robot Sophia that they were parading around. It's a big fake show because it was actually run by someone with a laptop off screen, right? You know, they were proposing all these things, you know, what it's going to be able to do. So how about ice cream? Okay. So you're going to be able to program the robot Sophia not only to taste ice cream, different tastes, but to prefer strawberry to vanilla. Can't be done. No matter how complicated a program they wrote, no matter how many algorithms they use, they can never get that robot to actually say, I prefer strawberry to vanilla, because it does not have appetency. It cannot taste anything. And so AI should be called archonic intelligence, not artificial intelligence. Now, when you look at AI, you have to be very sober and very balanced. And you have to realize that there are 2 faces of AI. One face is simply the human invention, which begins with Claude Shannon and Norbert Wiener. who was the father of cybernetics. Okay? So Claude Shannon wrote the initial formulas of AI. It's called The Science of Informatics. And Norbert Wiener introduced the theory of cybernetics. And out of those two, mother and father, you have AI today. That's totally something that human beings did. Archons didn't come up with that. We came up with that. And that's fine. But like many of the inventions of the human animal, once we come up with them, we need to learn how to manage them properly. And AI is just fine, kept within certain boundaries, managed within certain boundaries. It's just another tool like a hammer or a bicycle. But then there is the AI coming from the Archons, you see? And what they do is they take their mindset and they use the human-created AI for their advantage. So they love it that people are hypnotized and captivated by their iPhones, you see? Because in that way, they're taking a device which could be used within limited, certain limits, fine. Not beyond those limits. You can't run your life on AI. I've said that the human animal was not designed to run on MS-DOS.
No.
We weren't. Or Apple OS. We're not designed to run on that. But isn't that the ultimate goal that people like Klaus and Elon Musk are saying?
And it also says, I think, in the Gnostic text that the Archons wanted to become like we, but they couldn't. So they decided to make us become like them.
Yeah.
And if you look all around you, I mean, it's just...
You're looking at archontified people.
Yeah.
You talked about GPS.
Yeah.
As you rely on GPS to get somewhere, and you're archontifying yourself. Figure out how to go there yourself. We did it for thousands of years without AI. You need AI now to get to the Italian restaurant across town. Fuck no. You don't need it. So that dependence has become now terminal. Either we break out of that dependence on archonic intelligence, or we're goners, because not only did the Archons wish to make us like them, but once they make us like them, they will destroy us. Their intent is not to preserve us. The intent of the World Economic Forum is not to build back better and make a better world. That's a lie. Their intent is actually to destroy every natural human social interaction so that there's nothing left but them ruling the world.
So I already kept you for a long time. I want to spend some few minutes to talk about current events, the Great Reset and all that. But just maybe someone listening to this is confused. Okay, on the one hand, they have no intentions of their own. On the other hand, they have the intention of ruining this beautiful planet. Is that a contradiction?
No, it isn't. It's like if you have, say, a chemical like ammonia, you know that if you lean over a bucket that has some ammonia in it, you're going to have serious consequences. It's not because the ammonia has the intention to harm you. They're like ammonia. They're like an alien chemical. And so they don't have an intention. However, and this is the big however, given that they can operate through their proxies, given that they did make a neural hack and they are actually now controlling the neuronal circuits of certain members, certain people walking around, the intention of those individuals can be added to what the Archons do, and then that is the dangerous part. It's human intention driven by the archonic mindset that you're looking at today.
And as you said the last time, that there's a lot of writers and scholars that present a false version of Gnosticism, and I don't want to spend time on them. One writer, which I think is maybe worth mentioning, is an American, Paul Levy. He wrote the book Wetiko.
Right.
This was the Indian name, basically, of the Archons. And I just wanted to get your take on one thing he says, that he says that Wetiko, this mind virus, on the one hand, has the potential to ruin life on this planet for humanity. On the other hand, they're like, he says, there are teachers, because they're pointing to where we have our unhealed traumas that we have to deal with in order to sort of, what do you think about that?
Well, I actually had an interchange with him by email some years ago.
Okay.
When his book first came out, he contacted me. And he said, don't you think there are close affinities between the Gnostic diagnostic of the Archons and Wetiko? And I said, sure, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Wetiko comes from animistic peoples, indigenous peoples, and they can detect this archontic presence in their world, and they call it Wetiko, which is like the mental disease. Yeah. It's a psychopathy, really. Yeah. Wetiko is a psychopath. Fine, that's fine. You know, I'm not, I don't take a nasty stand against anyone who has complementary intel for Gnosis, not at all. However, I do draw very strong distinctions, and no, I would not call them our teachers in any sense. Their influence on us by facing their influence on us, we can learn, and we must learn, but they themselves are not teachers. Similarly, I would say regarding Carlos Castaneda, that he said that the Archons are a test, but they're not testing us intentionally so that we can beat their game, and then they can say, oh, great, we tested the humans, and look, they beat us at our game. No way. They're a test that's just come to us through an event that happened in the cosmos, which is the fall of the wisdom goddess.
So how aware this wisdom goddess, she is dreaming up our lives at the moment. How aware is she about this nightmare? Is she dreaming up this nightmare, or how aware is she about what is taking place now with this fourth industrial revolution and technocracy?
Well, that is the monumental question of our time. And I can assure you that among the community of Gnosis today, my school, friends and students around the world, that question is in the forefront of our mind continually. But you see, we don't look for the answer to that question in speculation or pretending or wishing she would do this or wishing she would do that. We go deeper into interaction with her to see how she is doing that. And that, of course, raises the subject of Sophia's correction. And that would be a great theme for another talk.
Yeah.
But for right now, let me say that, yeah, I have the evidence, and others as well, that she is aware. And I can even track through history the moment when she became aware. So perhaps as a closing subject, it would be good to bring the focus back to her, because she is the solution, and give you something to take away that might be really inspirational. The Gnostic Cosmology, as I said earlier in our talk, is not a creationist. Sophia didn't create the world. The world is not a created thing. The world is being dreamed. It is her dream. You've often heard it said that life is a dream. Begs the question, who's the dreamer? Not you. You are not the dreamer of life. I am not. How could anyone be so presumptuous? She is dreaming life right now. As we're talking, she's dreaming this conversation. She's dreaming you having toast and tea in the morning. And one of the beautiful and powerful themes of Gnostic teaching today is the lucid dream. So the story says that she came through this long evolution, this long development, this long adventure. That's in the fallen goddess scenario. And then she found herself dreaming the world. But at a certain moment, she went lucid in her dream. And that moment was around in the 1740s, believe it or not. And at that moment in her dream, it's as if she started to sense alarms. Something alarmed her, like someone's sleeping and then they start to be agitated. Was a nightmare coming? And she began to become lucid in her dream. What that means is that she can interact with the characters in her dream now. Up until 1740, she couldn't interact in the way she can now. And so she went lucid in her dream about 250, 270 years ago. And I can actually track this process. So the great and beautiful challenge of the Gnosis today is to know what you just asked. Is she interactive with us? Is she going to some way bring in her power to end this nightmare? When she woke up in the 1740s, she woke up to a nightmare. She realized that life on Earth was going toward a nightmare. She saw it coming. And since the Term of Gaia Awakening in 2008, she has made we have the opportunity to be interactive with her as she wakes in her lucid dream. And the opportunities of that are immense. And they're there for anyone who wants to get into it and find the sobriety and the discipline to interact with her. It's real, it's happening.